Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Electrification Coalition's National Park Week celebration. I'm Rebecca Saraboff. I'm a senior EV infrastructure associate at the Electrification Coalition, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's event. I am totally excited to kick off the EC's National Park Week celebration with a special edition of our Charging Infrastructure webinar series. This year, we're focusing widely on how working together helps us move the needle. We have big plans to bring in speakers from across our community to share their expertise, best practices, and most importantly, provide scalable models that we can all learn from on our webinar series this year. We can't wait to continue to build out this year's webinar series to focus on what you want to learn about. So don't hesitate to reach out to us at infrastructure@electrificationcoalition.org with suggestions, questions, or ideas for collaboration. In case you've not yet seen it, I am excited to share the EC's newest slate of tools with all of you. All of these tools are accessible to all of you on our website free of charge. First, I'm excited to share the EV Funding Finder. The EV Funding Finder is a user-friendly tool that allows everyone on this call to identify multiple pathways to fund transportation electrification initiatives. We created the EV Funding Finder as a result of unprecedented investment in transportation electrification at the federal level, which is 30 times more than previous funding levels, and that's not including the tax credits. We also created it with the acknowledgement that we must use every cent of both new and old federal funding in an efficient, effective, and equitable manner in order to meet the ambitious transportation electrification goals that we've set. In addition to identifying multiple funding pathways, the EV Funding Finder intends to show users how funding can be stacked and paired with other programs and where technical assistance is available. Some of this information is still forthcoming, which is why you might still see TBD under a couple of the funding options. We have also just published a resources page for the new Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grants Program. The Charging and Fueling Infrastructure, or CFI, grant program is a new $2.5 billion federal grant program that is focused on deploying EV charging on publicly accessible corridors and public roadways, and it's increasing accessibility to EV charging across urban and rural areas alike. You can find a variety of resources on our webpage, including a recording of a webinar that we ran featuring Steve Lomley from the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation in partnership with FOR. The grant applications are due on May 30th, which is very quickly approaching, so don't hesitate to reach out to us for support. Finally, we're happy to share the EC's new EV Infrastructure Hub and Spoke Accelerator. The accelerator is curating an ambitious set of actions and supplemental resources that allows governmental entities with an emphasis on rural and low-income communities and community-based organizations to leverage new federal funding and accelerate transportation electrification. The accelerator aims to impact all 50 states and US territories and at least 500 cities nationwide, assisting with the equitable disbursement of federal funding in EV deployment. Through the EV Accelerator, resources will be tailored to specific audiences and shared through an innovative spoke model via our network partners to achieve an at-scale electrification. Resources will be distributed through direct communication, webinars, op-eds, and more. And speaking of resources, we have lots of new content to share with you in celebration of National Park Week. We're going to spend the rest of this week and next hosting events and sharing resources and tools surrounding transportation electrification on public lands. We're really excited about this week because of the immense opportunity that lies ahead. The EC's mission is to achieve mass adoption of EVs in order to protect our national security and reduce dependence on oil in the transportation sector. By doing so, we're reducing carbon emissions from the transportation sector and protecting America's natural treasures, our national parks and lands, from the impacts of climate change. We spent the last few months talking to partners from the public and private sector, Adopt a Charger, Colorado, Rivian, National Park Foundation, and REI, just to name a few. We learned that the immense progress has been made in transportation electrification on public lands. We know that more than a dozen parks have EV charging, and we know that parks are beginning to deploy electric buses to transport visitors. According to DOE's Alternative Fuel Data Center Tracker, there are currently 101 charging ports at national parks. But we also know that there's been incredible challenges that we've seen in this area. And while movement towards installing chargers and deploying buses is moving quickly, we know that there are unique infrastructure and land use related challenges. We're looking forward to spending the week exploring more of these issues with some of the brightest minds like Kitty and Andrew who have joined us today. You can find all of this information along with all of our activities for the week on the EC Parks Hub, which will be in the chat in a moment for you to explore. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. After each of our speakers present, you'll have the opportunity to participate in a Q&A session. Please leave your questions for our speakers in the Q&A box that should be on the bottom right of your screen. We welcome all of your questions and we'll do our best to get to as many of the questions as we possibly can. So without further ado, I'm excited to welcome Kitty Adams. Kitty is the Executive Director and founder of Adopt a Charger. Kitty has facilitated the installation of hundreds of EV chargers in 10 states and has participated in a number of CEC and CARB workshops regarding alternative fuel vehicles and EV charging infrastructure. She was successfully awarded CEC grant funding to install EV charging at the California state parks and most recently a GFO as a part of a team to design a microgrid in a disadvantaged community. She has presented at the Electric Power Research Institute Symposium and has consulted on EV charging projects and policies nationwide. Kitty, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking for my slides. Is that something I should be doing? Oh, there we go. Okay, here it is. This is the very first EV charging station that was installed at a national park back in 2012. This is Chrissy Field in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. This charger has since been updated with a Rivian Waypoints charging station. But a couple things that this slide prompts me to tell you about is the man that's standing just to the right of the EV charging station, John Jarvis. John Jarvis is the former director of the National Park Service and the author of this book, National Parks Forever, that I highly recommend to people. But basically what I learned from working with John Jarvis is we're looking at in perpetuity. I even think that the National Park Service has a 7th generation element to their mission statement. So the decisions we're making today have to make sense for our grandchildren's grandchildren. And, you know, there's a lot to factor into that working in a national park. Another thing that I think about is that the agreements and the contracting. That's very important. It can take a while to get a project off the ground. I'd say like 18 months realistically to execute in a national park. Working on my next slide, please. Thank you. These are some of the sponsors that I've worked with. Adopt a Charger is really good at public-private partnerships. We've worked with other nonprofits. We've worked with state government, state federal agencies. We've worked with utilities. We've worked with automakers, equipment providers. So just about anyone that touches upon this space, we like to partner with. Next slide. This is Adopt a Charger, a little bit about Adopt a Charger. We're a nonprofit. I started this nonprofit with some friends back in 2011 because it's difficult to make a business case for EV charging, especially at national parks and state parks. There's no, there's sporadic use. They're in remote locations. It's not like downtown Santa Monica where the charging stations are getting used 20 times a day. So I decided to start a nonprofit similar to like PBS or NPR, where I rely on foundational funding from grants. And then I also tap into the enthusiasm of the EV drivers and rely on user support to keep the asset operational. The picture on the right is Yosemite. Yosemite I brought in Rivian, the automaker, as the sponsor at Yosemite. And it was interesting because the initial plan, we had a grant for 15 charging stations. And when I reached out to Frank Dean, the president of the Yosemite Conservancy, who I also know from his days at the National Park Service at the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, we realized really quickly, like 15 charging stations is just going to cause a lot of frustration when, 20,000 people are coming to the park at any given time. And a lot of those are coming from areas where there's a high density of electric vehicles. So we do have a phase 2 plan where we're going to be adding an additional 68 charging stations by the end of 2023 at Yosemite. Next slide, please. So this picture just shows you a variety of the different projects that we worked at. I'm highlighting here the sponsorship signage. And this is really important to me because I'm worried about not just the EV drivers, but people that don't drive electric vehicles. everybody feels ownership of the parks. So I don't want people to think that we're taking money from their already limited budget that could go to trail restoration or building a bathhouse or any of those items. I want it to be very clear to the EV drivers that these charging stations were enabled with, in this case, funding from Pacific Gas and Electric. So we want to just convey to people that this is, we're going outside and finding funding to make these programs happen. Something else that I think I should bring up on this slide, the top corner picture of Catoctin Mountain Park in Maryland. This was an example of the park got a grant and they installed the EV charging stations. They had to pay some networking fees. They were covered for the first year by the grant, but then after the grant ran out, they realized right away that the networking fees were costing more than the actual cost per kilowatt hour of the electricity that they were providing. So they were losing money on these charging stations and they shut them off because the parks cannot give away the electricity and they're still finalizing a way to bring the money into the system. So the EV driving community reached out to Adopt a Charger and said, hey, how can you help? So I reached out to a family foundation that gave a donation to provide for the ongoing electrical and maintenance of those charging stations. In the bottom corner, you'll see Cicely Muldoon, who's now, she's moved from Point Reyes to Yosemite, but when we unveiled the charging station at Point Reyes, we had a big ribbon cutting where we invited the Marin School of Environmental Leadership to come. And she gave a presentation about sustainability efforts within the park. So what I wanted to stress here is we're going beyond just charging cars, and we're trying to educate the public about why we're doing it, why we're offering this service. And for me, Adopt a Charger, the reason I started it was more from an advocacy standpoint. People need to see the charging stations at places they like to go to have confidence to buy the cars. And when people can engage in conversation with an actual owner, I'm winning. There's still a real disconnect when it comes to selling EVs at the dealership level. So the EV owners are actually the best salespeople for the new technology. Next slide, please. Okay, sorry. I got to bring up the challenges here. And this was an article that was in Clean Technica magazine. There's a lot of challenges when it comes to providing EV charging in these remote and rural locations. I mentioned the lack of a business case. They're difficult to commercialize. Another huge hurdle to offering EV charging is the networking. If you have to rely on a cell signal or you have to rely on Wi-Fi, oftentimes it's a non-starter. Even in a place like Yosemite that has a huge cell phone tower in the valley, when 20,000 people come to the valley and they're all on their cell phones trying to check in on Instagram or something, there's not the bandwidth. So oftentimes people can't download the app to access the EV charging station. So, the power is always present. It's all the other layers of complexity that sometimes affect the reliability. And when you're coming out to a remote location, reliability is a priority. There is no plan B oftentimes in some of these remote locations. We're trying to work with gateway communities to offer DC fast charging, but if somebody comes out there, we want to be able to, enable that zero emission round trip travel. So there's a couple instances here where I'm pointing out some of the difficulty in doing that. I know that, we are advancing and we're looking at some different technology. People are talking about the Starlink network. So the solutions will present themselves, but I don't want it to prevent us from offering this service when we know that there can be some workarounds like Adopt a Charger, or, I think back on a lot of the parks have a long history of offering electricity as an amenity because they have RV hookups where they offer a NEMA 1450 outlet. A lot of EV drivers put those NEMA 1450 outlets on the PlugShare outlet, on the PlugShare app. So power is always present. Whatever we offer, whatever complexity is required by these grants shouldn't affect actually offering this service. Next slide, please. This is a perfect example. Sorry to bring up like the not so good stories, but Mount Lassen is a huge challenge for a lot of EV drivers because there's no service there. And so people are required to download this app, which they, unless you download it before you get there, you're out of luck oftentimes because there's not bandwidth to do that. So even if you have like a Bluetooth solution, you definitely have to make sure that the driver can access the app to initiate the charge. Another problem at Mount Lassen, which I suspect, is that this charging station operates on the 3G network, which has been sunsetted. So I'm not sure what the plan is for updating here, but even when you can, like this driver here has commented on PlugShare, even when you can download the app and go through it, it's not operational. As an antidote, I'm offering a picture of Fort Ross State Historic Park. This is another area where there's no cell phone signal. So I just have that non-sophisticated, oftentimes people call them dumb chargers. It just provides the electricity, but there's no access restriction. And I got some money to cover the cost of electricity. What this has done is actually opened up this whole remote area to EV tourism. Now that this charging station is there, the gateway communities are seeing more electric vehicles coming through their area. The hotel properties have been adding EV charging. So it's kind of like the Johnny Appleseed approach. When we can put the charging at the destination, oftentimes it spurs investment in electric vehicles in the surrounding areas. Next slide, please. The other challenge, there's a lot of challenges, but the other challenge is lack of power. Sometimes it could be an environmental obstacle like tree roots that make it difficult to do a traditional, trenching conduit type situation. So there I've used an off-grid solution where it's powered by solar with the use of batteries. One thing, it also does help for grid resiliency. Oftentimes in these remote locations like Sonoma County, California, they lose power. So this can also act as emergency backup power for some of these locations. Just in an effort to be real, I'm showing you the charging station we installed at well, it wasn't installed, it was a dropped in off-grid solution from Beam Solar, and the batteries got stolen. So when you're in remote locations, oftentimes people have a lot of time to do vandalism. And so I know that Beam Solar's solution is now they're putting the batteries up in the canopy of the device itself. So maybe that makes it a little bit harder for somebody to access them. I also have a picture of Yoda Energy. This is a new solution I haven't tried yet, but I'm definitely keen to put in the right situation because the batteries are enclosed in a storage container so that the critters and the hoodlums can't get at them. And also too, it acts as an asset for, like I said, grid resiliency. When the grid goes down, there's exportable power in this unit that they can plug into the batteries to be able to power some emergency recovery stuff. Next slide, please. This is the biggest challenge for me working in the park situation is accommodating ADA accessibility. On the left, the bottom left is a picture of my nephew, John. So for me, it's personal. I want to make sure that people can access these places that are so special to everybody. And the EV charging has to go hand in hand with other ADA efforts in the park. So, a lot of people are familiar with the pathways that they're putting in beach locations and at lakes so that wheelchairs can access the lake shores. Also, too, there's a picture here of an option that's offered by the Michigan DNR at their state parks. And this is an off-road wheelchair so that people can access the trails. So the picture of the Rivian at Chrissy Field, it just demonstrates some of the ADA accessibility, physical accessibility that we need there. And that's the path of travel so that people can have, if you're driving an accessible van, you can have the space you need to unload the driver or the passenger. Also, you need to be accessible to the unit. So if somebody's in a wheelchair, if you're trying to navigate between two cars to get to the EV charging, that's not always possible. it's a little bit more difficult in the park situation to find the less than 2% slope that's necessary to provide the service. And it definitely affects the cost of doing these projects, because, you know, oftentimes you'll have to re-pour that part of the parking lot, repave that part of the parking lot. Another challenge with that is you're oftentimes going to lose a parking space. So that's a little bit tricky, because oftentimes these locations are oversubscribed as it is, and they can't necessarily eliminate a parking space, but it is necessary. And then on the bottom right, hopefully some of the experts that on this call or the Electrification Coalition can help me with this, because I have not been able to get an answer from anybody about a new requirement for the ADA. And this requirement is not just for the national parks. This is for any funding that comes from the federal government. And what it actually is requiring is auditory output. So similar to how you go to an ATM, and if somebody's vision impaired, they can plug in a headset and be talked through the prompts. You have to have some type of auditory cue for the EV driver that may be vision impaired. The only workaround right now is actually if it's as simple as just pulling up and plugging in. So Adopt a Charger actually is the workaround, because we don't require, you know, registering or putting a credit card. But the long game is we're going to have to figure out how to accommodate this, how somebody can come up and get talked through the process of putting a credit card in. And yes, I did a lot of talking really fast, but I think that is it. And I'm looking forward to not only your questions, but, you know, if anybody can comment on how I can make this better or easier or more accessible, I love to hear that as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kitty. I know that we have really appreciated working with you, and we really look up to your work here at the Electrification Coalition, and we're excited to keep working together and to keep learning from you and to help keep installing EV charging at national parks. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm now excited to welcome Andrew Grossman as Director of Destination Development for the Colorado Tourism Office. Andrew works with communities across the state to realize their potential as tourism destinations. Guided by the belief that we are all stronger together, he helps identify common challenges and opportunities within a diverse set of tourism stakeholders to develop a common vision for the change they want to see in their community. Before joining the Colorado Tourism Office, Andrew was the Destination Development Manager for Travel Oregon and the Director of Partnerships for Sustainable Travel International. In his free time, he can be found backpacking to alpine lakes or soaking in Colorado's electric hot springs.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks to the EC to host this, and it's great to share the stage with Kitty, who I just met earlier today. As mentioned, I'm Andrew Grossman, Director of Destination Development. Sort of an interesting term. A lot of what I do is work with destination marketing and management organizations throughout Colorado, like Visit Durango, Visit Estes Park, Visit Fort Collins, to really serve as their extended strategy and implementation team. Also work with tourism industry associations across the state. Like all of us, though, we have special projects, and one of mine is our Colorado Electric Byways program. So that's really what I'll be focusing on today. And then Rebecca did mention I used to work at Travel Oregon, where I used to manage the Oregon Electric Byways program. And I think there's only 2 states in the country that have a branded Electric Byways program, to my knowledge, and they're both ones that I've had a chance to be involved in. So happy to get my presentation going. If the slides can pop up for us. Great, perfect. Cool, let's see if that works. Oop. Not sure I can advance that, Marcus, if you want to go to the next one for me. Oh, yeah, well, this is a great picture of the Green Bridge over outside of Minturn. Yeah, so we are the Destination Marketing and Management Organization for the state of Colorado. We are a division of the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. We call ourselves OEDIT. It sounds very robotic. I swear I'm human somewhere underneath the skin suit. But essentially, you know, our mission as an organization is to achieve and sustain a healthy Colorado economy that works for everyone and protects what makes Colorado the best state in the country to live, work, start a business, raise a family, and retire. Next slide, please. Here's our chart. It's always, people always asking, how are you structured? How many folks do you have? We've got about 20 or so people at this point here at the CTO. You can kind of see me in the bottom left. I'm in our destination stewardship department. We also have a domestic and kind of consumer marketing team, and we also have an international marketing team. Want to go to the next one? Perfect. We've got a Colorado Tourism Roadmap 2.0 as our current strategic plan. It looks at the 3 pillars of destination stewardship, economic vitality, and industry leadership. And we exist to kind of advance these pillars through collaboration, inclusivity, innovation, and leadership. Great. Oh, I guess I can change. Yeah, perfect. I can change the slides now, Marcus. It's great. So I said destination stewardship. And essentially, the goal of that is to support our destinations to identify balance. And I think balance is the key word to pull out here. And it's a balance between quality of life for residents, quality of experience for visitors, while also enhancing our environment and our communities. And rooted within this idea of striking balance, we have a major focus on low impact travel. And that can be a variety of different things. Primarily, though, it's looking at low emissions or emissions-free travel. We know that that's really the primary generator of greenhouse gas emissions as it relates to the travel and tourism industry, but it expands into locally produced food or locally sourced products. We've seen a lot of work to advance dark sky designations, so reducing kind of light pollution and i.e. advanced energy efficiency or energy reductions through just kind of lighting. We also have a lot of sustainable businesses throughout the state of Colorado that have gotten sustainability certified. And then just being able to give back to nonprofit groups that advance this work all really comprise the totality of how we look at low impact travel. But I'm here today to talk to you about that first one, ways that we're looking at kind of low emissions and emissions-free transportation options. And really the flagship kind of signature initiative that we have is the Colorado Electric Byways program. So the context for this is that in 2021, the state of Colorado came out with the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap. And this is really what we point to as state agencies when it comes to why we are all investing in the electrification efforts, or if I was talking to Kitty, whether it be bicycle and mobility efforts or even public transportation efforts. But again, we're here to talk about electrification. So that's really why the rest of my slides are focused on that. And we've got targets that we're working towards. And really, again, transportation and mobility are priority areas that are identified in this roadmap. What's really exciting about the state of Colorado, truly, because I came from the state of Oregon, is that there is just such a strong partnership between the Department of Transportation here, CDOT, the Colorado Energy Office, CEO, and then the Colorado Tourism Office, CTO, to achieve this goal of really helping to transition our transportation systems to be more electric. I kind of call it the power triangle, if you will, where each of us, you know, have a different role to play, where CDOT really manages the roadway infrastructure, understands visitor patterns on roadways. You look at the Energy Office manages the technical know-how, subject matter expertise, and they manage all of the incentives that we offer as a state. And then the tourism office really engages in awareness building and helping to kind of build collective understanding of what the visitor opportunities, even residential opportunities are, to not compromise what you have to do in the state of Colorado just because you're using an electric vehicle. All 3 of our agencies also engage in stakeholder engagement, outreach, and kind of just overall awareness building of opportunities with the industry. And we've got a really robust set of financial incentives here in the state. We've got our EV fast charging corridor program, which is a series of strategic DC fast charging station investments. I think there's 34 that are planned. We're definitely more than halfway done installing them. And these are kind of those arterial investments. So look at those, you know, major thoroughfares of I-70, I-25 for us, and then kind of the major offshoots in between, where the state is just saying, we know we need these, let's invest in them. We also have an EV Plaza program that's really targeted more towards urban environments, looking at these like high concentration of multiple DC charging station units in kind of the high population areas. And then the one that I focus the most on in kind of my role with the Electric Byways is looking at the Charge Ahead Colorado program, which is really engaged in kind of rural infrastructure investments. And so this gets us to why we have our Colorado Electric Byways program. There is this statewide objective to transition the state's transportation system. We've got a series of incentive opportunities that really cover every aspect in kind of every geographical area of the state. But we wanted to be able to narrow our focus and really put a lot of intentionality in how we could kind of move things forward. Because, you look at this massive project that we're all looking at nationally, how can we just kind of like take a piece of it and call that, the major focus for us? But obviously there's a lot kind of happening elsewhere. But we have 26 scenic and historic byways located throughout the state. It is the most number of byways to my knowledge in the country. I actually also serve on the Colorado Scenic and Historic Byways Commission, which is the oversight and kind of designation body of the byways. And we really looked at saying, okay, well, these are already validated visitor transportation scenic routes, right? Let's really focus on those as a way to really narrow our efforts. So our goal is to electrify all 26 of these. And this goal is now firmly kind of imprinted in the larger plans for the state of Colorado, with it being included in the 2023 EV plan. And as of February 1st, 13 of our 26, so 50% of our byways are currently underneath designation as a Colorado Electric Byway. What does this mean is always a good question that I get asked. It's that DC fast charging stations, and this is really dual port, CHAdeMO and SAE combo, are located at least every 100 miles within the start and terminus of each byway. I think there's only 2 DC stations that I'm aware of that, are not Tesla, obviously, but within this SAE combo and CHAdeMO that aren't already dual standard. Colorado's done a great work of making sure that all of our DC stations have kind of both standards associated to them. Not every single byway is even 100 miles. So we've got this kind of subsection of, when byways are less than 70 miles, charging stations need to be located within 15 miles of the start or terminus, so that you can still keep with that idea of, at least every 100 miles you're getting access to some level of DC station. That's the requirement for designation. Yep. Yeah, good. Okay. And then what you can see here is this is a map of the state of Colorado and our 26 scenic and historic byways. We've got little lightning bolts next to the ones that have been designated as Colorado Electric Byways. And what's interesting, I know we're talking a little bit about national parks. We've got 4 national parks here in the state of Colorado. Rocky Mountain is kind of that top center one. Trail Ridge Road goes right through Rocky Mountain. It was one of the first sites that we designated. There's also a fantastic amount of state invested charging stations at the Estes Park Visitor Center. So it's a really nice kind of visitor experience opportunity to go to the visitor center in Estes Park, charge your car, talk to folks that are at the visitor center about what there's to do, and then potentially buy your time entry permit into the park and then drive through Trail Ridge Road. You've got Black Canyon of the Gunnison is kind of the top of the 3 that are down on the bottom left. West Elk Loop has now been designated, and that's one of the major access points to Black Canyon of the Gunnison. There's actually one station at the Blue Mesa Reservoir that is right basically near the entrance of the Black Canyon. Following all the way down to the bottom left, you've got Mesa Verde National Park. We have not been able to electrify that area yet, but again, it's a major target area for us. And then the one that's kind of bottom center is the Great Sand Dunes National Park. And again, have not been able to electrify that yet, but we are looking to get some stations installed in Alamosa right now, which is one of the major areas associated to that. I mentioned before that there's this work that's been done with all these different incentives. So I might need you to go to the next slide, Marcus. Cool. So this is the fast charging corridor, and you can see that this is where these major kind of thoroughfares are being installed on. And then this is where the scenic byways are, and it's a little tough to see in this, but the scenic byways are really the space between the major arteries, which is something that we kind of found really interesting when we started to do this work. And it really shows that as we layer these different incentives on top of each other, that the state of Colorado is doing a rather fantastic job at making sure that there's very little geography that's not being focused on with our incentives. So it's always helpful to think about, like, what have we been able to achieve? What's resulting from all this work? If you can go to the next one for me, Marcus. Keep going. Great. So as I keep alluding to, this has allowed us to narrow our focus and be more strategic with our resources. We've been able to start to direct our resources to our 4 national parks. It's really interesting. When I started doing this work in Oregon back in like 2014, 2015, there's a big focus on concentric circle urban electrification efforts. And I think that was really what people were thinking about. But really the X factor that we started doing at Travel Oregon was looking at linear-based travel patterns, linear-based movement. And that's really been a major focus for us within tourism, because you don't really do concentric circle travel. I mean, sometimes you do if you're just visiting a city, but we know at least in the Western states, you are looking at linear-based travel opportunities. And that's, one thing that's really exciting as we continue to build out our network. Hopefully you've seen a lot of images of electric vehicles and charging stations in my presentation. That's one thing that is part of the CTO's role in this power triangle, is that we really know that there's a major gap in photography related to electric vehicles. And I've been able to use my budget in both states to invest in high power, kind of really professional photography. That's a different way to look at building range confidence. My belief has always been, if we can showcase cars on scenic areas, it helps people realize that they can get there themselves. And that's really been a driving force for what I think tourism can do here, is really, showing people that you don't have to compromise your experiences if you choose to have an electric vehicle. And then we've also garnered quite a bit of media attention, which was really exciting. If you want to go to the next slide for me, Marcus. Most excited about this one article we got done, which had a New York Times journalists come out to the state of Colorado. We got them in an electric vehicle and got them to drive 4 of the Colorado electric byways that we designated first. That was an exciting opportunity, as well as several others. And again, it's just really looking at, how do we build that range confidence while we're also engaging in the infrastructure? One of the major limitations, I'll be honest, is that, a lot of people come to Colorado by plane, and we can't really get them into an electric vehicle yet if you're a traveler that visits by air. But our major focus is looking at, urban Coloradans or urban residents from adjacent states, and getting them to realize that they can still do what they want to do in the state of Colorado through the network that we've set up. There we go. So then the road ahead, where are we going next? I'm actually going to meet, I think one more for me, Marcus, sorry. Cool. So just meeting with the Energy Office and the Department of Transportation, we're going to propose one more electric byway on our May 3rd commission meeting, which is exciting. We'll hopefully be up to 14 at that point of our 26. We'll continue to target earned media to build awareness of this initiative. The Energy Office is actively running a fantastic statewide EV co-adoption campaign for residents, and they're using all the images that the Colorado Tourism Office invested. So it's just another example of how our agencies are collaborating and kind of sharing resources, and we're not doing it all ourselves. We really are kind of finding our comparative advantage and really activating partnerships to make this possible. And we are still working on ways to enable visitors to rent electric vehicles during their stay. But again, our major opportunity areas right now are earned media, where we can kind of, patchwork quilt access to vehicles. We've got great partnerships with a lot of the nonprofit groups that have partnerships with auto dealers to be able to get journalists into cars. And then truly looking at that, if you're a Colorado resident, let's get you out and enjoy the state, but you can do it behind an EV. And we were stoked to see all the Rivian cars come online, because I think that really kind of is emblematic of the type of vehicle that folks want to be able to drive into Colorado. And now we do know that Rivian's doing a lot of great work to expand the charging network as well here in the state. So I will say my final words here basically is that I thought we were so well positioned before that COVID thing that you might have heard about happened to us in 2020. There was just like all the cards were set up to fall at once. And then I do think we lost 18 months or so, but it's nice to see that there's a lot of wind behind our sails again. And I think you're going to see a lot of progress here in Colorado moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Andrew, I really liked your slide, the road ahead, because we know that the road ahead is most certainly electric. So I'm excited to bring you both back for a quick Q&A. As a reminder, you can submit more questions for Kitty and for Andrew in the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. So without further ado, as we step away from our computers in about 15 minutes, what is the first thing that we should do to champion EV charging on public lands?
Oh, Kitty, you're muted, I think.
Thank you. Before I answer that question, I just wanted to reiterate Andrew's woohoo for Rivian, because I've been doing a lot of projects with Rivian, and I was banging on the doors of all those legacy automakers for the past 10 years, and nobody was really giving me the type of response I wanted. When I reached out to Rivian, they were just all in. Rivian and Tesla have done a lot to expand EV charging in state parks and national parks. So I just definitely want to give them a shout out and a thank you. And the first thing, as we step away from it, I really want to just put this out to the EV driving community, because really that's the voice that's missing in all of this regulatory process. There's a lot of special interest lobbying that's going in and saying, we need X, Y, and Z. And oftentimes those make it prohibitive to actually the installation of the EV charging. So I want to encourage the EV drivers to use your voice. Don't just bitch about it on Twitter. Write, to the dockets. Give your feedback to your representatives. Like, make sure your voice is heard in all of this. We want to make sure everybody's focused on the end user here.
And just to build on that too, I mean, a lot of us that work in the public sector are public servants, and we really serve the will and interests of the public. And it's very hard for us to start making decisions unless we can validate that it's in the public interest. So to Kitty's point, definitely use your voice. Let, the entities that manage those land units that you want to see charging at, that's a priority for you, because then folks like us can then say that it's a priority for you.
That's great. Thank you. I know you both touched on some of your biggest barriers during your presentations. I'm wondering if you can sort of loop back to your biggest barriers and talk to us a little bit more about how you overcome them or how you're working on them right now, and let us know if there's anything we can do to help you.
I thank you for asking that, because it's gotten to the point where a lot of these funding opportunities are so prescriptive. Adopt a Charger has, even though we've proven to be successful, like really, I can't even think of a negative plug share check-in I've ever received, but oftentimes the requirement for data, network connectivity, ISO 115080, the ability to swipe a credit card, all of these additional requirements not only affect the reliability of the service, but they also affect the cost of actually installing those charging stations. And we were chatting before the program, and I was mentioning that, in 2014, I could install a charging station at a state park for $9,000. The cost now is close to $30,000 per charge port. And all of that is because of all of the regulation and requirements and things that have been added to EV charging. And I always remind people, these are glorified electrical outlets. So, I also mentioned a lot of times people are plugging into those NEMA 1450 outlets in the campground. Why is it any more complex than that?
Yeah, I think, on our end, I mentioned our incentive programs, and I think they are fantastic. And as I alluded to, they really do cover, every part. Like, there's no geography within Colorado that's not eligible for at least one of our incentives. And then a lot of the NEVI funding that's coming down from the feds is going to only kind of like layer on top of that. I will say that at least for Charge Ahead Colorado, even though it is a substantial amount of money that we're giving out, I do believe we still get 4 times the number of applications that we have funding for. So it really speaks to, even though I truly think that Colorado is a leader in the funding that we are making available, because the fact that NEVI is stacking on top of existing programming is really exciting for us. I think a lot of states are looking at NEVI as kind of their first foot in the door on this, in this regard, but there's still more demand than we have incentives for. And it's not that every single application is truly viable either, but truly that it's kind of 4 to 1. I think within the tourism landscape, right? I touched on this. A major barrier is that until I can get a rental fleet that's reliable and has inventory, I can't really take this programming to the next level. One kind of funny thing that happened back in Oregon was I was just looking up, like, does anybody care about the Oregon Electric Byways? And I found this tour operator in London that was selling Oregon Electric Byway packages into the state of Oregon. And I was like, hey, do you know how to get people in a rental car? Because I have no idea. And they were like, oh, I thought you guys know how to do that. So we ended up having to pull the tour essentially, but it validates that there's a huge demand in the European market. And I really believe this because I think back in the early 90s, you could see Europeans come to jump in a Suburban and drive our straight roads that are longer than a lot of countries in Europe. And I do think now there's a latent demand to get behind these, high performance and kind of high distance or capacity battery EVs. And I just really want to get the Europeans on these roads, I'll be honest with you. And that's the major barrier is just the rental car agencies. And, I know I worked with the EC with our energy office at one point on this. I've chatted with several of the major car rental organizations. And I can say that, in my conversations with them, their innovation teams are like 90% focused on this. So it's just an incredibly complex problem to solve because you look at like a lot of these are in like lots in areas that you just kind of have cars stacked on each other. And how do you get the charging in? So it's kind of like the way that the rental car agencies got designed is in conflict with, I think, the way that the infrastructure would need to be set up for electric vehicles. So that's a major barrier. But again, I know that there's a lot of really great and wonderfully smart people that are working on it. And when it's time, then I can go back to my tour operator friends in Europe.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. I know that we are thinking a lot about how to best collaborate with the rental car industry as well. And I'm glad that you brought that up. And going back, both of you mentioned federal funding. And I'm wondering how you can, how you think about federal funding impacting your work, how it helps you. Are you looking towards more than just NEVI? What do you think?
For me, it's a multiplier, definitely. And I am actively going to pursue some of the discretionary funding to try to help some of the state parks that I know of. I think having a resource like the Electrification Coalition to help navigate this is super important. A lot of people are reaching out to me for help. And honestly, I don't have all the answers even myself. So being able to have the resources, because what I've noticed with working with some of the state park agencies is they don't have the expertise. They don't have anybody on staff that's super well versed in electric vehicles and charging. So oftentimes they're getting their information from an EV charger salesperson. And oftentimes they're scared away from the process because that's not a good fit for what they're trying to achieve. So having this agnostic, nonpartisan resource is really super valuable for people.
I'll just keep saying similar stuff, but maybe differently, right? It's like, we have a lot of great incentives and the federal funding is kind of stacking on top of it. I think if I was interested in applying for funding in the state of Colorado, I'd probably look at the state programming. It feels like it's a little bit less restrictive potentially. But again, we aren't able to give out all the funding for the applications that we have. But if you look at, the three incentive, well, one of them, the charging corridors, is a strategic investment by the state, but then the EV Plaza program and Charge Ahead Colorado, I would argue that those are kind of competitive needs-based grant opportunities. Folks have to come to us with an idea. I think what we're doing here right now as we see some of these other federal programs come online, it's how could we as the state agency partnership look at projects that people wouldn't come to us to fund? How can we look at strategically doing outreach with areas that may not think of bigger projects that we kind of see gaps in the network for? Definitely in Southwest Colorado that I kind of showed earlier, there's that's just one of the major gap areas for us. It's complicated. It's mountainous terrain with long distances between communities, but Mesa Verde National Park is there. And, I think one thing we're looking at is could we look at this federal funding as an opportunity for us to strategically bring folks together to say the state's going to be behind you. This is not needs-based programming. This is innovative catalytic programming at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. I know at the EC, we think a lot about how federal funding and state funding can complement one another. And I also know that you can find a lot of those incentives from the federal level on the EV funding finder. So that's in the chat, and please be sure to check it out. So switching now a little bit from the government side to the industry side, can you both talk a little bit about what you need from the EV industry to continue doing your work at a high level?
I would say more flexibility in the spending approach there even within a single state park system, there's no one size fits all. So, some parks are like Golden Gate National Recreation Area is an urban park that's in surrounding San Francisco. So their needs are a lot different than Mount Lassen. So I think we need to have a little bit more flexibility in the approach so that we can tailor a program that best serves parks. I definitely always effort to keep the parks in the driver's seat, so to speak, so that they're not forced into a situation that may not be in their best interest.
More high clearance, all-wheel drive vehicles, please.
Right?
Awesome. That's really great. Thank you both. So when we did a bunch of field research, we learned a lot about innovative charging techniques. So things like solar, things like mobile charging. I'm wondering if you two have had experience with these kinds of innovative charging techniques and what your thoughts are on all of them.
I definitely have used some off-grid solar solutions, which I think is great. I mentioned that sometimes there's you can't have a ground disturbance, but you still want to offer EV charging in the parking lot. Also, oftentimes these places, there's a lack of adequate capacity. So, there's just not room in the panel to add something. The transformer may be overloaded. So finding innovative strategies that include batteries are awesome. Especially, a lot of people on this call probably are very familiar with demand charges. So if we can use like batteries to mitigate demand charges to be able to offer DC fast charging in remote and rural locations, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, this is usually when I go, hey, friends at the energy office, I need you to respond to questions because they're the subject matter experts and kind of the end of it. But we've talked a lot about it. I mean, if you look at the scenic and historic byways that we are looking to electrify, a lot of them have distances that are rather long in between the communities, longer than the 100 miles that we dictate for designation in the first place. So we know that there's a need for solar charging that goes into a battery that can still be considered a fast charger. I know that there's been, that seems like, the next frontier as it relates to kind of some of the new technology that will be a game changer for us. I know that we're already starting to install some of them. And again, this is where I'm just going to stop talking because I probably won't say it right, but I know that our station in Julesburg that allowed us to designate the South Platte River Scenic Byway was an example of, a different type of station that I believe had some sort of battery engineering to it. Yeah. So.
Awesome. Thanks. So I know that you both have touched on a number of folks that you have worked with to implement all of these projects. And I'm wondering if you can each spend a minute talking about your greatest champions and how you reached them.
Well, for me, I have two answers actually, because I answer to the EV driving community. That's who my boss is. So everything has to make sense for the end user. But having said that, I want a solution that works in the best interest of all concerned. So I do go back to my champions are the park personnel that are there 24/7, 365 days a year. Nobody knows their park better than they do. So they're the type of people that I like to get my influence from. And I also want to give some acknowledgement to the Native people. So, there's been a huge push for tribal communities to get EV charging. And I just look at the Indigenous people as making those decisions based on what's in the best interest of the seventh generation. So I also want to look back at the wisdom of the people that were here first.
There's a woman, her name is Mary, and she runs the old Parkdale Inn in Parkdale, Oregon. And for 3 years, every time I saw her, she would say, I want a charging station at my inn. And that really led Travel Oregon to design a program that, allowed for a rebate that we gave to Mary and got her a level 2 station at the old Parkdale Inn. And I think really having those, enthusiastic local advocates that, again, back to, how can you champion charging stations? I mean, if you look at, again, the public sector, we need folks to tell us what's important because nobody wants to listen to me. I have to point to people that have ideas that I can help kind of leverage to get momentum behind it. But so it's really this combination of, you know, these local advocates that raise their voices that we can then use to help make better decisions as the public sector. But I do think that every state should have a power triangle between the Energy Office, the Department of Transportation, and the Tourism Office as it relates to this work, because I truly see the value of that. And as I keep kind of alluding to, there's such a strong comparative advantage that results where, you know, we fund the photos that end up in the statewide adoption campaign, and the Energy Office can answer questions about charging technology way better than I can. And then the Department of Transportation really understands where things go. And that's, if you don't have those three things, I think you will not be as successful as you could be.
Okay. So our final question of our hour together is, what's next for both of you, and what can we do to support you as you do it?
What's next for me is I'm actually putting most of my focus, you know, I started out in California, Washington, Oregon, but my current focus is now Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio. I want to really use my experience to help people that are in underserved markets, people where, you know, maybe that state you're not allowed to buy a Tesla or Rivian. The dealerships there are not interested in selling electric vehicles. There's not a state incentive. So I want to go in there and mobilize the EV driving community to start to, you know, rattle the cage and make a difference. So for me, it's all about putting my focus and attention in the underserved areas.
What's nice for us is that we've had a plan for years, and it's really a long-term plan. So we'll continue to chip away at utilizing the narrow focus on the scenic and historic byways to really continue to drive statewide electrification efforts in kind of rural areas. Selfishly, I'm really always looking to work with my PR team on earned media opportunities. One in particular, we've got the Alpine Loop, which is kind of in Western Colorado. It's well, I keep saying I need high clearance all-wheel drive vehicles. It's a very Alpine, it's more than 10,000 feet, requires a high clearance vehicle. I don't think anybody's looking at talking about, you know, scenic drives of that nature. So it's a really unique opportunity to talk about the electrification efforts that we're all doing. And we're looking at doing some sort of press idea, media something, or at least to be able to document that experience would be a really exciting way to really show that, as I keep saying, you don't have to compromise your experience in Colorado just because you're putting your foot down on a car that's powered by electricity.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kitty and Andrew. It was really so wonderful to learn from you both. And thank you for your hard work to protect our natural treasures. And we look forward to supporting both of you moving forward. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Please be sure to check out the EC's Park Week Hub for more information. We're running a workshop for Gateway communities early next week about applying for federal funding, and we would love to have you join us. And we also hope that you're able to celebrate Park Week by visiting a national park. Admission fees will be waived at all national parks on Saturday in honor of Earth Day and the start of National Park Week. We're going to host the next installment of our charging infrastructure webinar series on June 15th, where we'll focus on utilizing utilities to accelerate adoption. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in June.
Thank you.